A quick warning before we begin. This video will contain major story spoilers for Shadow of the Colossus and Reign Over Me. Additionally, I will put trigger warnings on screen for some of the sensitive subjects that will be mentioned in this video. Mike Binder's 2007 drama film Reign Over Me delves into the frustratingly complicated journey of overcoming trauma. A dichotomy is explored between its two protagonists, portrayed by Adam Sandler and Don Cheadle respectively, Charlie Feynman and Dr. Alan Johnson. Charlie, who is one of Adam Sandler's more serious roles, is unable to surmount the trauma of his family's deaths and the horrific terrorist attacks of 9/11. His complex trauma pulls him into an emotionless state, only able to engulf himself in his temporary pleasures, intense music, an endless kitchen remodeling, and Team Ico's 2005 video game, Shadow of the Colossus. The film makes a point about the importance of the game, a world for Charlie to escape into free from the hardships of life and the remembrance of his grief and trauma. For fans of the game, Shadow of the Colossus is recognizable as a compelling subliminal motif throughout the film. For anyone who hasn't played Shadow of the Colossus, what if I told you that this game was planted in this film for a very intentional purpose? Shadow of the Colossus serves as the perfect melancholic extension of the film's thematic, themes of trauma and emotional recovery. 5 years after Charlie Feynman's wife and 3 young daughters lost their lives, the disheveled Charlie encounters his former college roommate, Alan Johnson. While Alan initially recognizes him on the street, Charlie's mental state is only made apparent to him when he confronts him later. Charlie avoided his reality for years. A twisted combination of survivor's guilt and grief stormed in his head, detaching himself from his remaining friends and family in an attempt to cope with his losses. Struggling with his own family life at home, Alan puts forth his best efforts in rekindling his friendship with Charlie. Trauma can manifest itself through various means: emotional abuse, physical abuse, or even survivor's guilt, much like in Charlie's case. While it may seem like just a buzzword to some, trauma is a very real and destructive occurrence. An estimated 70% of the US population alone has experienced at least one traumatic event, and just shy of 7% of the population may even have developed post-traumatic stress disorder. Throughout the film, Charlie continually constricts himself, closing himself off from any reminder of the traumatic events 5 years prior. Despite his best efforts though, the trauma always manages to find its way back, continuing his cycle of avoidance. A constant reminder of his trauma is his in-laws, who persist in attempting to help Charlie, as they believe he's still in denial about what happened to his family. This even causes Charlie to push Alan away, believing that he was sent as a proxy by his in-laws to offer him emotional support.
Charlie, get out of here!
To suppress the memories, Charlie finds other ways to experience positive emotions, such as playing the drums in a violent punk band and playing Shadow of the Colossus. With Alan's presence in Charlie's life, however, things take a turn for the worse. After opening up to Alan for the first time, Charlie reaches his tipping point and attempts assisted suicide by provoking police with an unloaded gun. Unsuccessful in his attempt, he ends up in a psychiatric ward with his fate in the hands of his in-laws. Yet, Charlie will not let the trauma win. In fear of being locked away in a ward, he finally acknowledges how his grief has debilitated him. Even if he continues running from his family, the losses will always move faster. Charlie makes the bold decision to confront his trauma head-on and learns to navigate it rather than attempting to reject it. Shadow of the Colossus follows the grief-stricken protagonist by the vague name Wander. Wander experienced a very similar loss to Charlie, the loss of the maiden Mono. Carrying Mono's body, Wander ventures to the Forbidden Lands, a peninsula separated from the outside world. Overcome with grief, he brings her body to an altar and makes a deal with a disembodied entity named Dorman, who vows to revive the girl on one condition. Wander must destroy the temple's 16 idols by defeating their physical incarnations, the Colossi. And so, with no other options, Wander ventures across the Forbidden Lands, searching for the Colossi. However, there was deception at play throughout Wander's journey. After slaying each Colossus, fragments of Dorman entered his body. Upon defeating the final Colossus, Wander's body becomes a new vessel for Dorman, becoming completely corrupted by his influence. Though Shadow of the Colossus is not the focal point of the film, Charlie remarks to Alan that
It's more like another dimension. You take a journey and discover yourself.
trauma is not something easily manageable alone, if at all. It's incredibly difficult to accurately portray in media, as if you have not experienced it yourself, you may never truly relate to the characters on screen. Reign Over Me explores trauma in a digestible way by portraying the permanent scars trauma leaves on an individual. A scar can be left so suddenly on a person that their life immediately changes course and may never fully be healed. Trauma manifests itself differently between individuals. For Charlie, addiction, escapism, and isolation became his life in attempts to cope with his loss. Even 5 years after his loss, the trauma toiled away, creating a detrimental lifestyle that could only be described as desolation. He grew captivated by the fantasy world of Shadow of the Colossus, the character Wander embodying his same grief. The two mediums share a similar message of how a single individual traverses their trauma. Though both Wander and Charlie share a similar traumatic experience, Wander fights back, whereas Charlie does not. Hence is why Charlie is so engrossed with the game. He imagines a world where he is able to fight back, imagining himself in the shoes of Wander. The Colossi themselves are symbolic to Charlie of both attachments to his reality and obstacles needed to overcome in his misguided pursuit. It is this determination in Wander that Charlie envies, the ability to face your struggles head on. For Charlie, his Colossi are his in-laws, who constantly serve as reminders of his lost family as they continually try to force their way into his life. There's one detail about the game's inclusion in the film that I cannot help but be fascinated by. It's the only game Charlie plays. Of course, we could assume that he plays other games off-screen, but looking at the film's contents alone, we see Charlie is addicted to this game. Wander's character captivates Charlie in a way that only he understands. He continues to defeat Colossus after Colossus, all in the hopes of reviving his beloved. Although Wander succumbs to Dormin, Mono is still inevitably revived at the end of the story. Charlie finds comfort in Wander's unyielding, determined spirit, an aspect that Charlie lacks due to his survivor's guilt. Even when Wander meets his end, Charlie is able to replay the game, keeping Wander alive. This ending even parallels his attempted suicide. Charlie opening up to Alan was akin to Wander slaying the Colossi, actions that would lead to their downfalls. Charlie's suicidal thoughts mirrored Dormin's corruption over Wander. In Wander's story, however, there was one character who fit the role of Alan. Lord Amon rushes to the Forbidden Lands as Wander slays the final Colossi. While Amon was unsuccessful in his attempt to save Wander from complete corruption, Alan was not. Alan extended his hand to Charlie when he needed it most, when his life was controlled by the corruption in his mind. Even though Charlie had been overwhelmed by trauma, Alan broke through the barriers and helped his friend who needed it the most. Though the film simplifies the recovery process, both narratives explore how characters manage their trauma in an understandable way. Shadow of the Colossus bears a more realistic approach, the protagonist succumbing to his trauma rather than finding a manageable solution. Reign Over Me offers a more hopeful light, showing Charlie regaining control of his life through healthily navigating his trauma. Even when times are desperate and it may seem there is no one coming to help, there will always be an Alan willing to reach out their hand to you. If you or anyone you know are struggling with thoughts of depression, anxiety, grief, or other mental distress, do not be afraid to let the Alan Johnsons into your life.